Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new edition of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jarrod Prugar, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Kevin Quigley. We're here to talk to you today about pass catchers, both offensively and hopefully defensively if things go to plan for Penn State defense. But first, the question mark and the elephant in the room, can the receivers be competent this year? Last year, Penn State essentially got to the national semifinal without a passing game outside of the tight end and Tyler Warren and the rest of his tight end brethren. But let's be real, the receiving game hasn't really been a strong suit of late, and that's thanks in large part to the carousel of coaches that they've had at the position. But such is life. But they were still able to get deep into the college football playoff without a passing game that featured the wide receivers. And that, I thought, was the most impressive thing last year. It's going to be different to see how they can handle this year.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to this is going to be the ultimate test for Marcus Hagans, I think. He's been in the program for several years now. I believe he was hired after the first offseason that we were doing the show. So he's going into his third full season, I believe, at this point in time. And really hasn't had necessarily the resources because there was a revolving door at the wide receiver position coach room before him, and then really it was depleted. You put a couple guys in the NFL. Deshaun Hamilton got to the NFL, had a cup of coffee, tore his ACL. Kind of is what it is. Chris Godwin is, by all accounts, a star in the NFL with the Bucs. KJ Hamler has made some noise as for his slot position style wide receiver that he is. But Juwan Johnson is in the NFL as a tight end, but more known for being the Oregon guy than he is a Penn State guy as well. So, there was talent in the wide receiver room, and then it kind of just trailed off. It just wasn't there. And Marcus Hagans really hasn't made any splashes on the recruiting trail. I think he's responsible for Caden Saunders, or was Caden Saunders here? But that's probably the highest profile recruit that you have in the room right now. And finally, Pat Kraft backed up the Brinks truck and focused on the wide receiver room this offseason. They bring in 3 transfers. Devontae Ross coming in from Troy, coming in from a lower level FBS school, maybe didn't take a lot of money. Kyron Hudson, kind of an outcast at USC, kind of didn't really fit their offense, didn't have a big role going forward. Writing was on the wall. We kind of traded Tamir Robinson for Kyron Hudson via the transfer portal. So that's probably, just kind of a net equal there. The money really came out when it was Trevor Pena with a B. Coming in from Syracuse, probably the top wide receiver in the portal, nearly 1,000 yards last year for Syracuse, helping Kyle McCord set the ACC passing record. And there's no excuse now. And I think the way college goes is you need to have dudes in your room performing well so that the outside perception is that you can get talent into your room, develop it, and put a good product out on the field, and then put a good product into the NFL. And if you don't put dudes into the NFL, it's going to be very hard for you to recruit, to bring kids in to say, hey, we're your pathway to the NFL when you haven't put NFL talent into the draft. And I think if they can do that with these guys, if they start performing well, obviously the recruiting season is going to be over before the draft, right? National Signing Day is the first weekend of December. It's a terrible spot for it, but that's where it is. But if Trevor Pena is a 1,000-yard guy or a 900-yard guy with 6 or 7 touchdowns, maybe he hits double digits, there's draft buzz around him. Guys in the high school who maybe are committed and haven't signed and they're going to flip, or guys that just don't know where they're going to go, they can look at that and be like, okay, wow, Marcus Hagans is a perfectly capable coach. It's just been the dudes in the room haven't been dudes. So it can kind of build up that momentum, because right now it feels like the recruiting trail for wide receivers is stalled out. This is a prove it year for the guys on the field that they brought in, because they likely spent a lot of money on that, but also the guy coaching them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest things is just getting these guys opportunities. We haven't really we've only scraped the surface of Andy Kotelnicki's offensive game plan. When you have a Swiss Army knife like Tyler Warren, it takes a lot of stress away from your lack of receiver game. But now, it's up to them to kind of develop. You've got Liam Clifford, who's going to be a slot guy, probably going to start. Pena's going to be out wide. Caden Saunders is a big what if. He just can't seem to stay healthy, which is unfortunate because the dude has shown flashes of being pretty good. Same thing with, Anthony Ivy. And I think Tyseer Denmark as well. They've shown, bits and pieces of, hey, maybe we got this. But I mean, it's just going to be one of those situations to see kind of who can take that next step. Maybe that's Hudson, maybe that's Ross, maybe it's Lyric Samuel, maybe it's some of these guys that are brand new to the program that are going to be able to take advantage of an opportunity that we just don't know anything really about yet. Who's going to come out of camp being that guy? The good news is the tight ends are about the same. They're listen, there's no replacing Tyler Warren in the offensive production that he had, but you get Andrew Rapplier back. You get Luke Reynolds back. Khalil Dinkins is, I think, expected to have a really good senior season. So I mean, there are some serious options, and what's going to happen next. But this should be a markedly improved receiver room. But will the room can be as good as it can be, but will that coincide with results on the field? And that's the thing. On paper, yeah, they look great. Traber Pena, great pickup. Kyron Hudson, great pickup. Devontae Ross, great pickup on paper. But will that culminate in results on the field? And that's the biggest question mark going into this season on both sides of the football, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Kyron Hudson, I think his game is what it is. It's going to be if he can fit into the offense. And he's a guy who's played in the Big Ten. He knows what that defense is. He knows big time college football because he's played in the Big Ten. Trevor Pena, ACC defense is not really known as being as tough, but you are still playing against top level talent. There are still guys coming in from the ACC into the NFL draft and are doing well at the next level. So that's there. Devontae Ross is kind of a smaller guy. He's probably going to end up playing the slot, and he's been at Troy, and Troy doesn't have the talent level and doesn't see the talent level except when LSU pays him $1.5 million to come get beat up on the first Saturday in September. So I think that's the question mark of how well does he transition into Power 4 football. But I think his skill set, just being that small, shifty, I can get open simply, like you can scheme me open. If you can get eye candy going on, if you get the cornerbacks and the safeties looking over here at this little fake over here, and he can slip out the back and burn people with speed, because he's kind of got the speed where one false step by a defensive back and he's gone, right? Like that's the kind of speed that hopefully he's going to bring to the Penn State program. And if you're Andy Kotelnicki, like that's somebody you're salivating over. And I don't think like Omari Evans, like great wide receiver, like showed flashes, but just didn't really have the consistency and maybe didn't have as much speed as Devontae Ross. So like it's an enhanced tool for Kotelnicki to go after. And I think it'll be interesting to see. That's the guy I'm probably most excited for like the prospect of what could be. Trevor Pena is he's coming in probably to be number one. Like if I'm looking at the wide receiver room, that's probably the guy I probably want to be Drew Aller's top target. But I think Devontae Ross, it's going to be interesting to see what he can do. And then, yeah, the tight end room, you mentioned it. Luke Reynolds, I think he's going to get the nod over Khalil. Khalil's been there forever. Khalil got overshadowed by Warren just because Warren, he's a Mackey Award winner, finished 7th in the Heisman Trophy race last year. I think it's Reynolds. It's going to be Reynolds' show. And then Andrew Rapplier, just hasn't been healthy, and he's been buried on the depth chart. So again, they can run 3 tight ends like they ran last year, and it'll be interesting to see I think I've said it many times this summer. It'll be good to not have the safety blanket, the full crutch that was Tyler Warren. As good as he was, he was a crutch, and the offense is going to have to evolve and become better without the absence of that one really big superstar and as a pass catcher. So I think Luke Reynolds. I don't know if he's in Mackey contention this year. I don't think he's going to have as much notoriety unless he also puts up 1,500 yards like Tyler Warren did last year. But maybe he's a Mackey Award winner in the 2026 season, should he stick around.
Right. And one more note, I think, on Devontae Ross that is important here is that he played at Troy under head coach Jarrod Parker. And Jarrod Parker is very familiar with Penn State, having been a coach there in 2019 before heading to West Virginia and then on to WVU onto Notre Dame and now Troy. So I think there's value in that because I don't think that James Franklin does his research. He does his diligence. They wouldn't go with Ross if they didn't think that he could do the job. So I think there's value in that. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm excited to see what Luke Reynolds can do. You know, they have a very deep tight end room yet again. Receivers, again, big question mark. Can they live up to it? Can they get back to, having a number one guy like Penn State had for so many years? You know, you go from, KJ Hamler, you had Jahan Dotson, you had Deshaun Hamilton, you had Chris Godwin, you had Allen Robinson. You have big dudes. You have dudes. Now can they go out and get this? You know what you're going to get out of Liam Clifford. You know what you're going to get out of some of these guys. Can some of these new guys come in and change things? That remains to be seen. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the other side of the football when we come back from this break on the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, let's go to the flip side and talk about the cornerbacks. We talked about the safeties last week. Is what it is. Cornerbacks, it's another talented room that has a lot of depth. You've got A.J. Harris. You've got Zion Tracy, Elliott Washington II. You've Davion Collins. So you've got some dudes coming back that have got some significant playing time over the past few seasons. And I'm excited to see what those guys are able to do under Terry Smith, one of the most respected coaches in the game of college football.
Yeah, I think the biggest question mark is they graduate Jalen Kimber to the NFL. He's now on the Tennessee Titans. A.J. Harris has no problem being that outside cornerback on his side. Elliott Washington played a good amount last year. I think he's got no problem stepping into the vacancy that Jalen Kimber left. I think he had 7 pass breakups and a pick last year, so more than capable as an outside cornerback. Zion Tracy, again, another guy. I think Zion was the slot guy last year for a good bit of time, but that role had a lot of rotation to it, and I think the rotation is key there. He'll probably take over the nickel spot, probably a hybrid, Jalen Reed blitzing type nickelback. I think he'll have some freedom to do that. And then my guy in the cornerback room was Davion Collins. I want to get your strategy. When you go to a game and you're watching it in the press box, like you watch the game, but every couple drives, like I just focused in on just one guy and just like seeing what they were doing. Like how were they playing into the grand scheme of things? Like you're watching the rest of the play, but like really focusing in on it. And for some reason I picked Davion Collins against Washington. Don't ask me why. There was just this small, he's probably 5'10", 160 in real life, 170 in real life. I met him on the field after the game. So kind of a smaller dude. And he was out there just flying around, throwing his body around, making plays left and right. And like, he didn't play a lot of snaps. I think he had, less than 20 snaps on the defensive ball. It may have even been less than 15. And like, it just seemed like every snap that he was in, he made an impact play. He was around the ball. Did he have a pick or a fumble? He made an impact play, and it was just like, oh wow, like I'm gonna watch this guy the rest of the game. And like it kept happening. So that's probably the most excited like the person I'm most excited to see is he made a lot of strides, especially late in the season. And I want to see him continue that, because I think he's a guy that may not start, but with Jim Knowles playing predominantly 5 defensive backs, defensive back depth is going to be important. You're probably going to be in 3 cornerbacks more than 3 safeties, because I think you have more depth at the cornerback room, and it just makes more sense to do it that way. So you're probably going to need 5 to 6 guys in the cornerback room, and that's where I think like he's probably that 4th guy, and maybe the third and 4th guy just rotate series like they do with the running backs. So I think that's where I'm really focusing in on cornerbacks this year, is Aldavian Collins.
Yeah, I think he's expected to have a good year. He had a great year last year. But yeah, I mean that's the beauty of the Jim Knowles defense. You know that 3-3-5, that 4-2-5 type of style gives him a lot of options in the secondary, and especially with as deep as these cornerbacks and these safeties are, they have options. They have, if you want to go with the 3 cornerback set when you've got a passing down, or if you want to go 3 safeties or 4 safeties when it's a running situation, you have options, and I'm very interested to see. Now, outside of those guys, you've got a lot of youth and inexperience. I mean, Harris, Tracy, and Washington are all juniors. Aldavian Collins is a redshirt junior. I mean, you got a legacy here in Dante Nastasi. His dad AJ was an absolute baller back in the day for State High, and then for Penn State. But you got Darius Dixon, who joined the team out of Mater Dei out in California. So he can play, or at least he should be able to translate there. You got Jameer Joseph, Joshua Johnson, Xavier Thomas with 2 X's. If you put 2 X's in your name, it's a Central Catholic guy. I would imagine he might be able to play some a little bit. And then you got Tyler Armstead out of Cannon Mac, who's a redshirt freshman, and Kenny Wosley Jr. I mean, I don't know much about those guys, but the upper end, you just have to be able to withstand maybe an injury or 2. But they do have that depth that can withstand that. It's who's going to step up behind those guys, if something goes terribly wrong, or who can get that, that level of experience.
And I think especially for cornerbacks, just because you're more out on an island and you don't you have the safety net, but with the way Jim Knowles runs his defense, it feels like there's a lot of moving parts underneath. And then how well do they pick up the defense and they pick up the moving parts? There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of complex coverages. And Jim Knowles' defense works best when everybody does everything correctly. And it is very critical that everybody is exactly where they're supposed to be at all times in the down. And so I think the key thing here is, can they pick it up and be proficient early in the season? They've got the 3 games to really get into it, but then there's going to be some big games late in the middle of October that we're going to need to be on our P's and Q's in the cornerback room.
Exactly, and I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how that defense develops over time. Obviously, early in the season, we're not going to see anything. But as you get into conference playing deeper in the season, just the complexities of those coverages and certain things. But it all comes down to up front. And we're going to talk about up front next week on both sides of the football, offensive line, defensive line, those guys. Because in the trenches, if they can get to the quarterback, Denida Sutton getting to the quarterback, guys like that, I think is going to be huge for the secondary, because that's going to force the quarterback into bad decisions, force the things to open up a little bit and see what happens. But I think Penn State on the secondary, especially at cornerback, they're in good shape. Safety wise, I think they're in good shape as well. I really don't think there's anything to worry about defensively, especially for Nittany Lions. Other than maybe some depth pieces in that front 7 in the fronts. But again, that's every team everywhere. So for now, Penn State defensively is in really good hands. Again, we're going to talk about the defensive line and then the linebackers here later this month, or later in podcasts. But so far, so good for Penn State in the secondary, and in the quarterback room.
Yep. I think this is a big year for him, and it's all going to come down to how fast do they pick up the Jim Knowles defense. I think that's probably the biggest question mark. It's always going to be a question mark when you get a new coordinator, and if they can play at or slightly above the level that they played last year, I think they're in good hands. With the exception of the Oregon game. The Oregon game was just pure speed. It felt like they were flat-footed and
It
a
was
lot
a
of
track meet.
crossers.
Like being there in person, like that was an absolute track meet and was crazy to see unfold in person. And in the second half, they settled down, figured out things, and they just it was intense.
And I think that's that's the outlier this year. That's not going to be the norm. Maybe when Oregon comes to town, they try to turn it into a track meet. But for the 11 of the other 12 games in the regular season, I think you're going to be more. You're not going to see that. And I think if they can play at the level that they did last year, they'll be in good hands.
Well, there you have it for the cornerbacks. We'll talk more about whatever we want to talk about in the third segment when we come back from this break on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lasching Out Podcast and the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jarrod. He's Kevin. Kevin, let's talk Media Day. Media Day happened in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places, last week. Big Ten teams went out that way from, most of them in the Midwest. Obviously, the Pac-12 teams that just joined are very ecstatic. That's far less. But Las Vegas, it's a great place. It is one of those situations where a lot can go wrong if they were allowed out, but most times they fly in and they fly right back out, which again is also an issue. But it takes away in this new journalism world, so to speak, that not a lot of beat writers from the East Coast or the Midwest are able to travel. Newspapers, online publications are all struggling to make ends meet for the most part. So traveling out to Las Vegas for Media Day for a day of interviews isn't a fiscally responsible, opportunity for these people. And these are very important opportunities to get in front of players and coaches and ask questions that need to be asked. And I think that's a misstep on, and I guess it's the other way around too for the teams that are on the West Coast coming to Chicago or Indianapolis, where Big Ten Media Day typically is. But I just think there's got to be a better solution, for those that maybe can't make it, or maybe not go out across the country for these.
I think the issue is it's the national conferences that we've been talking about since conference realignment really kicked off again. And that's when, we talked about it, but is it feasible for softball teams to be flying from State College to UCLA just to get their butt kicked by the number one team in the country? It just doesn't make sense. And I think this is another one of those, this is the epitome of it. There's not a college football game. There's not going to be 90,000 people at USC just to watch the game where you can split the revenue. There's TV money coming in. There's the ad money. There's all of this stuff. It's just at a hotel conference center. And it's for a conference that was so desperate to get the New York market to then not put the media days in New York, or like you said, the headquarters is in Chicago, and Chicago's a little bit more centric. A lot of the teams are going to be there, but to put it all the way out in Nevada, it just doesn't make sense. And you're catering to the 4 Pac-12 teams that you brought in, and the other 14 teams in the conference have a minimum, probably 3 to 4 hour flight. I think I flew to Seattle last year, and I think it was like a 6-hour flight, and it's a lot. And I don't get it. Maybe they flip it between Nevada, Chicago, and New York. Like maybe they come into that compromise where everybody's leapfrogging year to year. But again, it's still hard not that I make those trips because I do this on the side and I really can't leave my big job. Because like you said, ends meet. It's just puzzling, and it makes it hard for everybody else. Sure, the world's connected. There's YouTube, there's Twitter, X, the Everything app. There's ways to get connected, but a Big Ten media day in Las Vegas, Nevada. It just doesn't make sense.
It's tough. And, for me personally, I've been to media day in Indianapolis one time, if I remember correctly. And it was great for me because I could go, to media day and then go to an Indianapolis Indians game to get some, Pirates content. And that was huge. Now, obviously that's just me, but I mean, I have no problem with Indy or Cincinnati Cincinnati. It has no thing, but Chicago as well. I mean, that would make sense. New York would make sense, tap into some of these markets and alternate, the Midwest market, that Chicago, Indianapolis. Now, the beauty of Indianapolis is you're having it at Lucas Oil Stadium, and you have plenty of space and plenty of opportunity. That's where your Big Ten championship game is going to be held. Yada, yada, yada. That makes sense, and it made sense when teams were in the Midwest or the East Coast. There's space there. Obviously that's a big deal. Penn State, that's an easy flight. Ohio State, easy trip. Michigan, easy trip. Every team really it's an easier trip. You're flying into a bigger airport. Chicago would be about the same. I'm sure you can find space in Chicago to have this type of event, and they had it over 3 days now. Obviously, with the amount of teams that are in there, with 18 teams, you have the opportunity to have it over 3 days, make a weekend out of it. They had it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which is another thing too. That's not always easy to get to, find good flights and those sorts of things, but have the opportunity to just make it easier for everybody involved, all the stakeholders. Like, do I think that you should cater to the media people and their desires and everything as much as you could? Maybe. But you gotta make
it is media. It is media day.
Right.
It should be accessible to the media.
I know we didn't send any writers out there, but that's also one of those situations we don't have the opportunity to do a cross country flight. And I think and when it comes down to picking and choosing where you have to go and where you can go, that's not good. Journalism and those sorts of things are dwindling as far as the finances are concerned, and that's a problem. When you look at it from the grand scheme of things, and I hope that the things change and get better, and they take that into consideration. Now, maybe this goes back to the old school baseball days where the beat writers flew on the planes with everybody, and the universities chartered a plane, but that's obviously costs money, and but you have to think of the financial aspects of it too. And you talk about all of the finances and everything in college sports now. You talk about the conferences, this conference schedules, this and that, and the other thing, and then you find this rift, right? This divide, and you see this at Big Ten Media Day where James Franklin brought it up, and he's been staunch about this, about teams in each conference playing the same amount of non-conference games. In the Big Ten, it's 8. In the SEC, it's 9. And those are the two biggest ones right now that are having all of these issues. It's got to be one or the other. Everybody should be on a fair playing field. And maybe 8 is the magic number, right? That's 8. So you get 8 conference games. You're playing 8 different opponents of your 18 or the 17 different teams you can play in your conference. And then you rotate every other year, or you have one, different thing like that. That gives you four other games, and of those 4, I would say an FCS one to start, and then 3 other, maybe let's get some action in here, or not a power forward school, group of 5 school. That to me would be a perfect schedule, in my opinion. I mean, I think these FCS teams matter. As a guy that grew up or went to Robert Morris and saw Division I AA football, that helps revenue. I mean, our RMU starts the season at West Virginia this year, so go Colonials. But it's just one of those deals where they need that money too. Keep it in house. Play that rivalry game, non-conference. Play Pitt first game of the year or second game of the year. Do that. I don't know if that's in the cards, but again, the SEC needs to be doing that too, because they've got that bye week at the end of the season when they play FCS schools.
Yeah, I think you got to flip. SEC only plays 8 conference games, whereas the Big Ten plays 9. the SEC always gripes and complains that, their 8 games are harder than anybody else's. Sure, but if all you're doing is beating up on each other, are they really that hard? I mean, Alabama was the only team from there that was winning national championships there for a while. Georgia's trying to. They've won once. Have they won once? Yeah, they've won once. But then, Ohio State's done their part. Michigan's done their part in the Big Ten, and hopefully Penn State could do their part this year in the Big Ten. Just a little slide in there, but no, there needs to be unification, and I think the problem is until there is unification of college football, and you keep in that conference model, I think that's going to be the point of contention. Because if you're a Big Ten school and you are playing guaranteed 9 Power 4 schools that are in your conference, do you want a scheduled 10th game against an ACC opponent or an SEC opponent or a Big 12 opponent? Do you want that? Like, it sometimes doesn't make sense because that's an extra harder. Whereas Alabama's playing Troy or Tennessee Chattanooga on the weekend before Thanksgiving, and weekend before Thanksgiving, Penn State has Nebraska, and they followed up with Rutgers. But that's just what it is. But it's Nebraska's a significantly more difficult opponent than Tennessee Chattanooga. So I think there needs to be some unification. I do like the 8+1 model, 8 plus another Power 5 school or Power 4 school at this point in time, because RIP the Pac-12. So, if Penn State kept the home and home against Virginia Tech, probably a bad example because that program's maybe not as big as it was, but maybe they do the Big Ten SEC challenge. They do it in basketball. They do Big Ten ACC. What if they did a Big Ten SEC challenge in football, where third game of the year it's Big Ten versus SEC week, and that really brings eye to that third week of the college football season. Maybe they do it over 2 weeks, the second and third week of the season, because there's all the kickoff games, the Chick-fil-A kickoff game, the Jerry World kickoff game. There's all of these games going on, and the Big Ten's kind of left out. You got Texas going to Ohio State this year, but now Ohio State is playing Texas plus 9 Big Ten games. Like, that's a gauntlet of a schedule, even if you think that the Big Ten may not be as strong as the SEC. So, yeah, I think the answer here is unification, consistent scheduling across the board, but it's going to take probably a little bit of an ego hit for Greg Sankey to step down as his assumed position of commissioner of college football as the commissioner of the SEC. But there needs to be a unifying voice in the room. There needs to be a central power. There needs to be a central office where all of these decisions are making. I don't think it's at the NCAA. I think there needs to be, maybe the headquarters is in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of Fame, where college football's headquarters are, and that's where the letters of the law come from. The NCAA can govern it, sure, but there needs to be a voice for college football and a voice for like scheduling across the board.
It's got to go both ways, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. Until they're not, then who knows what's going to happen? But for right now, that's kind of the way the cookie crumbles in college football. And I think that's one of the biggest issues to date. And it'll be interesting to see if and when anybody would even be willing to change things. And who knows? It is what it is.
And one last thing on the scheduling. I do think the FCS opponents are critical. The FBS level 2, Division 1 AA, FCS. I think all of that matters just because it like you said, it finances the athletic department, and it's a way for the state funds to get shuffled around. Penn State's paying Villanova. In South Carolina, it's not a law, but it's pretty much the rule, where they're playing Clemson and South Carolina have to go play a small school within South Carolina. It helps with the economics of it all, and that's how you keep all of this stuff sustainable in a time where, quite frankly, the money is not sustainable. So
it's an imperfect system that could be fixed very easily, but such is life. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, it does create common fodder. But Kevin, any parting shots before we go?
Yeah, actually, I do. I'm going to come
Here we
locked and
go.
loaded with parting shots this year. We're talking about competitive balance, and there's been a big topic about competitive balance elsewhere in the sports world, and it has to do with Bryce Harper. What a buffoon, ballsy, gutsy, whatever you want to call it. I think he's just a dick. Going up to your commissioner and just saying like, "Get the f out of my locker room." To which props to Rob Manfred. I don't really like Rob Manfred, but props to him and be like, I'm not getting the f out of here at all. And the big push is the salary cap in baseball. Um, Major League Baseball is a four-market league at this point in time. You got LA, you got Chicago, you've got New York, and maybe Boston or Atlanta sneak in as in that four spot. It's not sustainable. And as fans of the Pirates, as you and I are, and fans of other teams like the Tampa Bay Rays and the Kansas City Royals, they win the World Series and now they're back into purgatory and ambiguity. And it's just not fun where every year it's a matter of who can spend the most. You got the Dodgers spending $400 and some million and sign Shohei to nearly $1 billion deal, and they don't pay any of it in the year to avoid the luxury tax. Like I think the Shohei Ohtani contract is the tipping point for all of this. And like, that is the ultimate, we need to get this thing under control. And, it cost the NHL a season in the mid 90s when they went to a salary cap because nobody wanted to give it up. It's the haves and the have nots. And I think the difference between baseball and the other leagues and getting to the salary cap is that the guys coming in on their rookie deals, like they're the ones that are going to be impacted. And that's how it is in every other league. Like when they adjusted the NFL pay scale, it affected only the rookies. And when they did the NHL, it adjusted only the rookies. But baseball's unique. You got 7 years of control. Paul Skeens can't get a deal until he's played 7 full years in the majors or he goes to arbitration. I think arbitration's after year 5, year 6. Like it's a
Somewhere around
long,
there, yeah.
it's a long time to get money. So I think the uphill battle to get a salary cap in Major League Baseball is going to be tough, but man, it's 20 years overdue. It's 30 years overdue. When did they lose the World Series? Was that also in the 90s?
Yeah, it was mid 90s. You might not have been born yet.
If not, I was not able to comprehend a lockout for a players union. But it's long overdue. And if I think Rob Manfred handled the Pete Rose situation wrong this summer. But if he can get a salary cap, I think he goes down as probably the best commissioner in Major League Baseball because I think it's necessary. It's needed for the sustainability of the league long term.
What's crazy to me when the median salary is the league minimum, that should never be the case. And that's, should there be a salary floor? Yes. But baseball is such a weird sport that you just don't know what you're going to get from whoever is playing.
And you can't get a floor without a cap.
Right.
And because you have to have the revenue sharing, you've got to have the TV deals, you've got to have all the local markets feed into a national TV pot of money. It's what the NBA does. It's what the NHL does for revenue sharing. And maybe you give the players 51% of the revenue. I don't care. Like maybe that's the bone you have to give them. But the problem is that Scott Boras just has too much power.
Yeah, the higher salaries like the Harpers, the Ohtanis, those guys, they have the fair share of the money, and then you see guys that are on the lower end of the spectrum, and the money isn't there. That's why the median salary is in fact the major league is the league minimum, which is absurd to me. And you only get that, after you acquire so many years. But that's kind of the way that it is, and I don't know. And there's going to need a lot. There's going to be a lot that needs to change for something to happen in baseball, or they probably will get to a work stoppage here in the next few years, and that's unfortunate because I think baseball's popularity is creeping back up yet again.
Yeah, I think if you're already talking about a work stoppage, it expires December of 2026. So we're 17 months away from the CBA expiring, and there's already talks about the lockout and causing the MLB games. I think we're destined for a lockout. And there was a brief lockout in 2020 during COVID, which that was its whole thing. But The salary cap was a big point of contention there. The MLB ultimately decided to not go with the salary cap that time. But I think this next one can get ugly.
Yes. And that MLB strike was 94 into 95.
Which is right after the NHL, I think.
Yes.
The NHL lost the 93 or the 94 season?
They lost a couple. But yeah, I mean, it's the fact that we're talking about it now, 94. But it's just one of those deals. Now we see what happens, and that would be very Pirates thing to lose a year of control of Paul Skeens due to a work stoppage.
Yep.
But for Kevin Quigley, this has been Jarrod Prugar on the Lasching Out Podcast. We thank you as always for tuning in, and we look forward to talking to you next week on the Nittany Sports Now Network.